Good afternoon or morning for those on the West Coast. Welcome to our webinar about your organizational roadmap for 2022, ServiceNow expansion and maturity. We'll be serving you expert advice about platform strategy, how to avoid silos, security, and much more. And just as a reminder, this webinar will be recorded and we'll be emailing out a link after the session is over. So today we are joined by Eric Lewis, a senior principal in our transformation advisory practice at Acorio. Eric has been in technology for over 30 years, working for Fortune 100 companies, leading global organizations through technology transformations and organizational change. He specializes in IT strategy and management, operational efficiency, ITSM, ITOM, and ITBM. We also have Grant Pulver, our Vice President of Client Success Executives at Acorio. Grant has been in the technology business for 25 plus years and has vast experience in technology, consulting, and management. He specializes in ITSM, customer experience, and driving global or shared services strategies, large transformations, and consolidations in multiple verticals. Our next presenter is Josh Scott, our Vice President of Industry Strategy and Operations at Acorio. Josh brings 20 plus years of IT and management consulting experience, specializing in enterprise service management, transformations, and catering to a wide variety of industries. Leaning on his broad industry expertise, Josh leads Acorio's industry-focused strategy and operations and helps our customers address the unique shared services challenges found within key vertical markets, including healthcare, financial services, manufacturing, and retail. And last but not least, joining us is Joshua Young. Joshua is currently a platform /enterprise architect, associate director, leading pre-sales of Acorio /NTT DATA ServiceNow programmatic advisory and implementation efforts for customers globally. With 15 plus years of experience, Joshua loves developing both long and short-term strategies that eliminate unnecessary costs, deliver innovation, and promote lean simplification. And if this is your first webinar with us, you may be wondering who Acorio is and why we're positioned to speak with you today. Acorio is the largest exclusively focused consultancy in the ServiceNow ecosystem, a global leader in product line workflows and total certifications. We were named as one of the best US consultancies by SPI. But if you really want to get to know us, then there's one simple thread that brings us all together. We're passionate about our clients, the work that they do, and we consider it our mission to empower them to drive real outcomes throughout their ServiceNow journey. I'll be passing the mic over to Joshua in just a second, but I want to remind you that we will be taking questions at the end of the webinar, so be sure to ask your questions in the BrightTalk interface, and we will do our very best to answer at the end of the session. I think we are all ready to get started, so I will pass things over to Joshua.
Thank you so much, Sonder. Well, glad to see everybody here today. Just to give a little bit of additional context before we start diving deep into some of these topics, we want to talk a little bit about roadmap strategy. Ultimately, we know that every organization might say they have one, but in reality, what does that really look like, particularly when we apply that to strategic platforms like ServiceNow? This past year, we found that over 76% of ServiceNow users said that they had a strategic roadmap. But when we start diving into the data, if we jump into the next slide, we'll see the reality that only about 54% said that the roadmap has changed. And in a year that so much around our world and individual organizations had been changing, it seems unlikely that that's a roadmap for success. So what we'd like to do is position the next speaker, Eric, to talk a little bit about the importance of that platform strategy and how we can achieve some of those goals.
Thank you, Joshua. So I would like to start our 2022 roadmap discussion with a real quick poll, just to see how many of you use ServiceNow to achieve your strategic objectives. Do not care if it's a corporate or IT. We would just something that you can attribute the direct use of ServiceNow to something strategically in your organization. Poll will pop up in front of your screen if you could just respond. We really want to understand how you're really seeing your organization or seeing your use of the platform. Okay. Give it a few more seconds here. Just quick yes or no. Okay. And we're seeing some interesting results here. Okay, so that's what I would like to do, is really the first item that we like to focus on. And that's not actually a roadmap item, but it is the foundation for success for roadmaps. And it's really having that strategic direction for your platforms. It is critical to ensure that you have an established strategy for your platform. What is it trying to accomplish? How will you plan on using the platform? We find so many organizations really can't answer that question or answer the question about what objectives the platform is going to help you overcome or achieve in your daily and monthly use. So that's something for you to think about as you go and you develop your roadmap and you put this roadmap, as Josh just indicated to you. You have a large percentage that have roadmaps, but a large percentage are also not using them. So many clients, as I stated, have difficulties answering that question and spend a lot of time chasing features. So I want to look at some of these components that just appeared on your screen to how do you go and determine that strategy? What is critical to that success? The first and foremost, and we find this so often, is having that executive support and cultural acceptance for not only the ServiceNow platform, but the strategy that you're trying to employ. Everyone knows that executive support of a platform is important, and that applies very much to ServiceNow. Our experience shows us in talking with our clients, getting that executive to say it is your system of record, it is your system of purpose, enables so many initiatives to be successful. So you need to communicate to those executives on what the value of the platform is, how the platform can be used to achieve their goals. Likewise, when it comes to expanding the ServiceNow platform inside your organization, having business units understand how the platform can help them achieve specific objectives, achieve their specific goals, it becomes very critical to success. It cannot be a build it and they will come mentality, or some organizations like to force the use of ServiceNow to individual organizations, and those tactics simply do not work. Support is key to expanding the platform and ensuring that adoption. So Grant, I'm going to ask you to provide a little feedback. I know you interface with our client executives quite frequently, and you talk about executive support of the platform and using it to achieve those objectives. So feel free to add a little color there.
Yeah, I think what's important when you're talking through this with the executive level is, while operational activities are important and efficiencies and all that, it's really got to spin into more of a business value discussion. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. And, it's really important that this roadmap and your thoughts and your pieces that are put on there really align with what your business outside of IT or outside of HR or outside of customer service, what the business is trying to accomplish through all this, so that there is some measured activities there. And to get that support, it was when we were putting this together, we talked a little bit about executive support and cultural acceptance and kind of the two sides of that. And we'll get a little bit more into the cultural acceptance piece with the OCM. But to me, it's really important as you're walking through and thinking this and having the discussions with the executive support teams, but you're also starting that groundswell and starting to give the reasons from an employee and customer experience type discussion, to be able to have both ends of those spectrums meet in the middle for this entire initiative to improve your services to both your employees and your customers.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's always the great segue. That's a great segue into the next piece, Grant. It's, that value proposition to, both from an executive perspective and then obviously an organization. And that's really our item number 2 is, to have that conversation with the executives is, being able to articulate the value that the platform is bringing to you. So many individuals go to point solution explanation or are unable to really say, here's the value of the platform, has for your organization or the organization that they're leading. And I think that really, continues kind of the same message that you need to be able to explain what the platform can do, not only today, but what it can do, for you in the future. And that's where the roadmap becomes very, very important in how you should construct your roadmaps, is showing that value proposition being developed over time, being able to achieve the specific objectives or challenges within your organization, using ServiceNow to maybe automate functionality, or maybe using ServiceNow to provide information. One of the things I always tell organizations when I'm interfacing with them is you need to utilize the information collected within the ServiceNow platform to explain really three critical things: what individuals are working on, who they're doing their work for, and how efficiently that work is being performed. Simply put, roadmaps should always have some sort of reporting or dashboard initiatives. Dashboards go stale, reports go stale over time, and you should always have those initiatives on your roadmap. Grant, kind of coming back again to you, I know you and I have done several presentations on metrics and KPIs within the platform. Maybe it'll lend a little more color, tying that into value proposition and, having those executive conversations.
Yeah, I think it's really important to point out that, while this is a platform roadmap, and while we're talking about the technology and what we can do and what we can't do from a technology perspective, it's really, really important. Most companies have 4 to 5 objectives per year, whether it's grow revenue, grow margin, whatever that is, lower cost. I think that's your starting point for these, because that's the business value that's going to drive the adoption and the expansion of these platforms, and being able to correlate what Eric was talking around efficiencies and where that is, and how the platform will help you get to there, but more importantly, how you can measure it and prove success behind it. I threw this slide up here just to kind of visualize where we are in this whole conversation of, we want to really understand, and we kind of keep going to different levels. And at the highest level, it's all about those business objectives, right? And then we get down into what are the enablers for that. And what I always try to do with our customers as we're having these discussions is we want to understand what those enablers are, and then grid them out on a scale so that we can start to look at what are those high impacting items that will help enable us, that are low complexity. And, we use the words low hanging fruit or whatever that is. And it's, to me, we start in that upper left, and that's how we start to get that incremental value. And then from this grid, that's when we can start to put those pieces together to start looking at the order of attack that we want to do in the roadmap, and how we want to expand the platform, whether it's from a user experience or a customer experience or a increasing margin, or what that initiative is that we want in there. There's items that we can do quickly to really get that value. And usually what happens is you put 10 items on this list, and 5 of them accomplish 85-90% of what you're trying to get to. And it really helps you to start thinking about that order of attack to move through.
Yeah, you talk about enablers, and Grant, one of the things we do in advisory services is we really talk about what is platform success, and we look at that really in 4 pillars. Obviously, we just spoke about the strategic importance of having that executive support, the strategy for the platform. We're going to talk about organization next, but that's really one of the pillars. The next pillar is process, and then the 4th pillar is technology. So I'd like to kind of focus the conversation on that 3rd pillar, which is really gets to your enabling point, is how do you get that information to have those conversations and know what is going on, with the platform and the results the platform is supposed to deliver to you. And that's really taking a look at your processes and ensuring your processes are of a certain state and maturity. We find so often organizations are not looking to see if their processes are efficient, up to date, and are they properly governed. A lot of organizations we talk to, you ask them, when's the last time you looked at their process, and they will very clearly answer you. Oh, a couple of years ago, 5, 6, 7 years ago, it's critical for organizations to ensure their roadmaps, have some sort of process maturation initiative on it. It ensures that what you're doing in the platform is efficient, and that you're getting those business results to the value proposition that Grant just spoke of. I always tell folks businesses are constantly changing. Most organizations are not looking at their process with a similar frequency. And that's not that it's a one-to-one relationship, but businesses change. You should therefore be evaluating your processes. Are they adequate to what is going on in your business today? We almost guarantee a stale process is going to guarantee platform failure at some point in time. Along with organizations constantly looking at, maturing their processes, ensuring the governance of these processes and adherence is critical. There should be a constant evaluation. A process within an organization, and especially a process tied to a platform like ServiceNow, it should always have a continuous improvement effort related to it. And again, these can all be roadmap items that you really should think about beyond just the modules and functionality inside of the tool. Joshua, I know you spend a lot of time architecting solutions for our clients and having deep conversations. I know you always dig in to understand what their process and their maturity is like. So can you add a little color to kind of what I was just speaking about?
Absolutely, Eric. And it's a really interesting topic because anyone who's been working in this ecosystem for any significant period of time should already know the mantra of, yes, I can do this, but should I? Um, the difference is really imperative to effectively understand the needs versus the wants of not only your internal organization, but the organization at large, and what your required commitments are for certain maturity levels, including things like external governance factors or regulatory requirements, which we'll touch again on later. What you'll be able to see on this slide is an example of how you might position some of those priorities and accountability throughout the organization. But the main important takeaway here is that these maturity levels are aligned to outcomes. That's how you effectively drive prioritization, not only of your maturity development needs, but the goals of the organization and how they relate to measurable improvement, thus justification of value delivered on a strategic platform like ServiceNow. These kinds of wants versus needs can take many different forms. Just because you have an organizational need to be at the highest level of maturity for incident doesn't also necessarily mean you need to be at the highest level of maturity for problem management. Maybe a lower maturity level is okay for where you currently are on your roadmap and journey, not only on the platform, but as an organization and what you're organizationally, in terms of people resources, able to support. Realistically, the needs of the organization rarely stagnate, and the ability to swiftly adapt and adjust a strategic roadmap to align with those changing needs of the organization by building goals based on outcomes for advancing not only maturity components across multiple processes, the platform, and the organization, hopefully setting the gold standard for other programs and projects like this across other strategic platforms in the organization for quite a long time when done properly. But being able to effectively change with the times, as we all have seen in the past number of years, things are changing even at a faster pace than they have before, and we need to be able to react in a way that allows us to understand, again, the difference between those wants and needs from a maturity standpoint, but ultimately also the governance processes behind the process for how to ingest, categorize, and ultimately implement those changes, not only from a technology standpoint, but also from a process and governance standpoint. Those are some of the key things I think that are really interesting whenever we get to talk to different customers around what their needs are, because the reality is every organization is different. Some of the goals might be the same across different organizations, but the order in which we address them might be different. The critical path dependencies to get them there might be different based on what they've already built versus what they plan to build. And ultimately, it's a really fun way to ensure that what we're building hopefully will outlast our individual roles and involvement with that organization. Eric, those are some of the things that I always think are super interesting when we talk about process maturity, but I'll hand it back to you to start talking about how we can actually affect that change in an impactful way across the organization with buy-in.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you talk about every organization being different, and how you go about that change is really our next topic. And one that, when I know I'm personally engaged with clients, we're always including it in our roadmaps, is really organizational change management components. Grant and I work on several projects together, and we will always say that, and I'll give him a chance to comment here in a second, how important the success and failure of all projects, whether it's an implementation, it's modification, expanding a platform, organizational change management is so critical to the success. In so many organizations, not maliciously or unintentionally, just do not put the value or the focus on it that's needed. And again, it can become roadmap items that, as these processes change, as your business value that you're trying to achieve changes, that has impact on individuals. So what we really, try to tell folks when we're engaging them is, for every module change, every enhancement, process change, you're stating some kind of organizational change component on your roadmap to assure that you are evaluating the impact to your users, you're evaluating the impact to their daily jobs. I think we've all lived in this world where lack of information, lack of understanding will develop bad behaviors or misconceptions around things. So, I always tell folks that, as we're engaging, you're developing a roadmap, put on those roadmap items, things that are going to affect your user base, to, again, not prohibit or cause challenges for your platform expansion. And, you have your executive support out there saying, hey, use this platform, it's good for you. The last thing you want is people going, I don't know how to use it. I can't get the results I want out of it because nobody's trained me on it. So it becomes very critical. Grant, again, from your perspective, having those executive conversations, just talk a little bit about the things that you and I have gone back and forth with time and time again on organizational change management and its importance.
Yeah, I feel like we spend our 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock p.m. nights talking about this sometimes, but to me, it's super important. And, we call it organizational change or change management, whatever we want to call it. But at the end of the day, it's around adoption, right? And getting that groundswell and buy-in is probably one of the most important things as you're moving through and expanding the platform. So to me, transparency is so important in this, and communication, because you want to get your enablers and your evangelists, you want to enable them to support what you're doing and move through. And part of that is getting their feedback and their buy-in up front with this org change and adoption. And to me, I feel like if anything's going to change, process is somewhat easy to change, technology is easy to change. It's really about the feelings and the buy-in and the adoption that really cause a lot of problems as you're moving through this. I think it's super important to share where you're going, why you're going there, and how you're measuring success as you move through the whole roadmap process and the maturization of your platform. And again, I think it's very important, the transparency of why you're doing what you're doing and how it aligns to the business goals and how it helps make people successful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you just brought up kind of really segues us into our next topic, which is, the organizational roadmap. And again, one of these components, as I mentioned, in the 4 pillars that we look at, what leads to platform success, really the second one down is that organization. And many businesses, many functions kind of lose sight when planning out a roadmap of this component. It really can lead to unrealized value. And how is your business unit constructed? How's the organization constructed? Is very important. If you do not have that support organization set up correctly, or there's alignment that is missing, and we'll talk about this here in a second, it is going to lead to failure. And again, these are components that a lot of organizations that we interface with, when we tell them these are roadmap items, it's a little bit eye-opening to them, because they're like, oh, never thought of that as a roadmap item. When you think about the ServiceNow platform, expanding it across your enterprises, you have modules for HR, customer service, risk and compliance. It's important to ensure that your organizational construct is matching, supporting those different functions in their use and objectives. So 2022, for all of the individuals on the call listening, you please think about your organizational structure and alignment with the platform. The very first one you're seeing in the list is that alignment component in organizational silos that may appear. Grant, let's kind of, again, those eight o'clock calls that we talk about. We discuss how do you get alignment among these various organizations that are competing for different resources, have different intentions on how to use the platform. We spend a lot of time collaborating on how do we break that down from our advisory perspective. So feel free to add some color there.
Yeah, I think it's, we go back to the organizational change management of communicating what you're doing, why you're doing it, and how you're doing it, right? And that business alignment. And all of that goes into play with that prioritization. So, as there's a single ServiceNow platform team with multiple customers, meaning customer service, HR, finance, risk and compliance, and all of those, I think it's really important from a prioritization standpoint that you're communicating across that entire group of stakeholders, because there's ideas that you're doing in IT that CSM, your customer service group, may want to adopt. There's things that affect both areas or all areas at a platform level. And I think getting that buy-in and helping and having people participate in helping prioritize events really goes a long way. I know, like when I was an executive, there'd be times that I'd have to wait 2 months to get a change in. But because of the open communications, I understood there was 6 other things that the platform team was trying to do that were going to bring a whole lot more value to the company. And it's important that we have that transparency to help with that whole prioritization. And then, the big thing that I was saying about waiting that 2 months is I helped prioritize that, because I knew what our business objectives above me were, and I knew the things that were ahead of me in the backlog were much more important from an accomplishment standpoint to help get to those objectives. And as we're walking through this, we put a little section on here on roles and responsibilities, and I think it's really important that we think about that in our roadmap as well, because that's constantly evolving. And I think, you have your platform owner and your process owner, and those people kind of make that decision and start to move through and help prioritize, but they're really the organizers of that process, especially the platform owner, right? Your process owners in all those areas are the ones that help give you the priorities and then help discuss with the other groups to move through. And if you look at it, like the right 4 are really important to work together to get that information, to be able to bring it together with the platform owner and your governance group to help define those. So we just threw this slide up here because I think it's important for people to think of as they're thinking about who's participating in that and how we're doing it and what's going on to help drive those. It's not necessarily a person in your company. It's not necessarily another headcount. It's a role that people can be. And I always used it, especially from a process owner and a business analyst standpoint. It was a reward for people to get off the phones or get out of their everyday life of working in spreadsheets or whatever that was to do. And then obviously your architect needs to be heavily involved in what those priorities are, because we talked about the low hanging fruit and the high priority, low complexity items. And usually they're the ones that are involved from a decision standpoint on what the low complexity things are. Anything to add, Eric?
I think we may have lost Eric due to some technology issues, so we're going to carry on.
Okay. So next we're going to talk a little bit about the platform and kind of some of the thoughts that we put into when we're filling out our roadmap or creating our roadmaps. You can go to the next slide. So, one of the big things to align with is the platform expansion, right? As we look through a certain vertical like IT or HR or customer service, we have our roadmap to mature those, but we also look across the board and that layer that moves through that's enterprise wide. And I go back to, it's really important to align those with business values. And to get to that business values, you got to understand what your gaps are and really be honest with yourself. Sometimes there's reporting there, sometimes there's not, and honest with your groups of what your gaps are and how you need to improve. And then you move into the, how can the platform support this? And then, as we're looking at it, it's easy to make the decision of, okay, we need an application for HR. We're right now handling everything in email. We're doing 50,000 emails a month, and there's no organizations. Our customers have no expectations. We don't know how well we're performing. We have a pretty good idea, but no way to prove it out. So it's easy to make that decision, but where you get into is when you're starting to look at the maturization of each of those organizations and what those next steps are. And we talked about that 1 through 10 list and focusing on the top 3 or 4 that'll get you 80% of the way. But really that's a continuous motion, right? As the platform matures, as your organization matures, it's a monthly or a quarterly at least review of what those items are to put in there. So start looking at your report, start understanding, and it's really important to me when we talk is we start to not look at the operational data, but more on the impact to the business and start looking at those for those ideas and have somebody collate those reports to start identifying those gaps, to identify movements. What you want to be careful with is recognizing too far down in that list and then starting to customize your platform or customize the applications in it. Joshua, can you talk for a few minutes about technical debt and where we are with that and how we kind of think about it?
Absolutely, Grant. One of my favorite topics. Technical debt is a pretty simple concept, I think, for most people. And ultimately, it can take many forms. It can be shelfware. It could be legacy ways of doing things and storing data. It could be 10 integrations when really you only need one. The reality is, when we think about technical debt, the obvious goal is to reduce it. And the only way we're going to effectively do that is if we have a tool or a platform, either consolidation or rationalization, modernization imperative, where we're really designing what a strategic platform looks like for an organization, and then consolidating activities, processes, procedures, governance, all of those components into those strategic platforms. That allows us to not only minimize the number of tools we're leveraging in any particular either organization at large or individual business unit, IT versus non-IT, whether we're building out something to support the organization or building something so that they can rapidly prototype and develop new programs or service offerings, both internally and externally to the broader organization. Ultimately, we want to identify here are opportunities for either functionality consolidation or a more effective or aggressive data aggregation plan or methodology. People love to say that ServiceNow is the source of truth, and I couldn't disagree. I know, don't throw fruit and vegetables at me yet, with that statement more. Because it's not always the actual source of truth. What ServiceNow is the great data aggregator of its time. We can pull in data from many other sources, and we can build reconciliation rules for which data we want to contain where. What ServiceNow really is a centralization of information. It's a way to go as a one-stop shop for what is ultimately driving the organization forward. And by identifying where those gaps in the organization live today from a technology platform standpoint, tool, legacy, ways of handling things that today could be handled maybe through an API integration, but right now we're doing it through an Excel or CSV file being posted to an FTP folder and then running a cron job to go and grab that every couple hours. Identifying those opportunities as well as understanding the risk implications of not changing those things and what that does to not only your ability to adapt to a changing roadmap or the strategic needs of an organization, but also just from an actual security standpoint, which we'll talk about later, not addressing technical debt. What are the risks that we introduce into our environment when we ignore them or when we push them to the side? So this is a huge component of something that I know we have been talking with our customers about for years, and it's definitely something that's been at the forefront of a lot of our conversations, in particular this past year, and I know it's going to continue that trend in 2022. Grant, hopefully that illuminated a little bit about some of the things that we try and touch on around technical debt. But I'm even more interested as we start thinking about how these things can align for different kinds of organizations. And maybe, Josh, you could talk to us a little bit about how we're looking at ServiceNow utilization through different industry verticals.
Yeah, sure, Josh. Thanks. It's a topic that's near and dear to my heart, but I think as everyone is becoming painfully aware, it's super important to start looking at ServiceNow in a different way these days. There's really a third lens now, right? First, I think everyone was told to look at ServiceNow to transform IT. Next, it was how do we transform our shared services organizations into using enterprise service management? And now, with what ServiceNow is doing and where they're heading, the third lens is we need to look at things from an industry point of view. ServiceNow with the platform is taking deep dives and making big investments into industry verticals. Primarily right now, it's financial services, manufacturing, telecom, and healthcare are fast followers to those two. And they've stood up full teams. They're selling industry-specific solutions. They're releasing industry-specific platform improvements. And they're tailoring everything around industry-specific needs. So much so that Acorio is taking similar deep dives into industries, which is part of my role. But we're developing packaged solutions, first within financial services and manufacturing, with more industries to come later this year. But my recommendation for everyone before we move into the next topic is if your company fits into one of these industry verticals that ServiceNow is doubling down on, you have a real opportunity to think about the platform in a new and different way. You have an opportunity to compare and contrast what your company is doing versus what other companies in your industry are doing with the platform. And I think you've got a real opportunity to do some cutting edge stuff with the new functionality that ServiceNow is releasing, which will answer specific questions and deliver specific industry value for you. So just some food for thought. Can we move into the next slide now? So I'm just going to take this section as well. We're going to talk a little bit about something that I think is vitally important. We've seen exactly how important it is over the past few years, but focusing in on both customer and employee experience with ServiceNow. Next slide, please. Thank you. So I think about this in a couple of different ways. One is how are you making your business resilient for your employees and your customers? And then next is, how can we use employee and customer experience as differentiators? And then finally, what are some methods that we can do to really unify the experience and simplify it? So to start, the pandemic has forced everyone's hands. The companies that weren't resilient enough at the beginning of the pandemic to withstand the changing market dynamics that we've experienced over the past few years, they suffered consequences. The good to great companies that had a true approach to business continuity, that allowed a flexible shift, that allowed them to be nimble, that allowed their employees to maintain productivity, that the companies that were able to keep employees and customers engaged without impacting their experiences, they're the ones that got to leap a little bit ahead over the past few years. But regardless, all companies have learned firsthand where gaps in employee and customer experience exist. In some ways, we learned the hard way. So when we're talking with customers now about this, we're driving our clients to use ServiceNow as a differentiator, to really provide a more resilient approach to supporting customers, employees alike. You may ask how to do that, right? So one is taking a step back, providing a unified employee experience using portals in the right way, using modern support capabilities like AI and chat, standardizing how those interactions and experiences are managed across each and every one of your shared services functions so that your employees have an easy time interacting with those groups. Using orchestration and automation opportunities to make employee tasks easier, or maybe take them out of their hands altogether. Unifying and simplifying your self-service strategy. So giving employees and customers one place to go for support, giving them one consistent interaction, one taxonomy, or at least a common taxonomy, one look and feel from a UI point of view, one common language and terminology used no matter what organization is providing the service, making it easy for them to help themselves and empower themselves, and then improve knowledge management as well. And then finally, talk to your people. It's amazing how many portals we've seen stood up in a vacuum and released into the wild, and then people just kind of crossing their fingers and hoping that the experience is great. I can't recommend more getting your teams involved, have their voices be heard, and incorporate those teams into focus groups and strategic workshops, and defining what the name would be, what the terminology will be, get that all involved and get that real buy-in up front so that you can be sure that once you release your improved employee and customer experience strategy, it's going to be something that really sings. So in summary, before I pass it back to the other Josh for our last topic, just be sure to think hard about prioritizing employee and customer experience in 2022. There's a lot of great functionality on ServiceNow within recent releases. And I think it's, in my opinion, the number one priority that people need to be looking into this year. So Josh, take it away. I think you said you were going to talk about IRM and security.
Yeah, thanks very much, Josh. Not confusing at all for folks having two of us on here at the same time and back to back, no less. One of the interesting things I think around this particular topic I need to address up front is probably just a nomenclature reset for a lot of folks. People may be used to seeing GRC and security instead of maybe IRM and security. And really all IRM stands for is integrated risk management. I forget at which point Gartner kind of decided, hey, this is going to be the new umbrella for governance, risk, compliance, business continuity planning, and other components that kind of go into some of those broader risk mitigation objectives at an organization. But here, that's where we are. And we definitely want to make sure we're taking that risk-focused vision and approach to integrating those kinds of needs into our roadmap as we go forward. And it's absolutely going to continue to be a massive initiative for most organizations this year, like it has in previous years. If you're anything like me, you're probably surprised that people are still playing catch up. I think I just saw that the government finally announced, I won't say which three-letter organization, but they're finally taking a zero tolerance approach to security. And my gosh, how great to hear that, but maybe 20 years too late, right? And so we have to ask ourselves a couple of questions as we start to get into this space. And that's really, let's start with, when you're about to cross a busy street, are you going to make it, or are you going to get hit by a car? Immediately upon deciding the answers to those kinds of questions, you're performing an instant, at that point in time, risk assessment, and you're evaluating impact versus urgency. The choice that you make once you complete that assessment really depends on your risk appetite and how you can kind of move forward. So one thing I'm really curious about is a poll we're going to be putting up here that I'm really interested to see people's answers as we kind of move forward, because that appetite is different for everybody. And there are different motivations or factors, whether they're internally generated or externally mandated through things like regulatory guidance, through laws in the states and countries and local regions that you operate in. Something that we're really seeing as an interesting shift and pushing this kind of forward, and I think we can move to the next slide, in this space, is who's driving what kinds of behaviors. And we're really seeing an interesting shift where security organizations are really starting to be the ones who are pushing asset risk strategies in the IT space for internal organizations, so that the maturity of asset lifecycle management is really being pushed not from a desire to, have a cost out initiative or build an obsolescence plan or procurement strategies. It's really more around understanding what your risk exposure is for things like inherent risks based on either hardware or software, but also ultimately how we can effectively build in an agreed upon risk registry for those kinds of risks, but also importantly, a set of policies, control objectives, and controls tied to mitigating those risks over the long term, as well as integrating with something we'll talk about more in a little bit, how we respond to those incidents as they're happening in the moment. One of the really interesting things I think in this space is not just what happens internal to an organization, how you manage those things, but how you interact with your vendors and your partners in this space. You're probably not building your own hardware. You might create some of your own software. Maybe that's internally, maybe that's targeted externally organization, and that's the product you sell. But every organization has some third-party risk that they're ultimately going to need to manage. And we're seeing a lot of people understand now, not only are there particular impacts to their organization they have to manage, they have to worry about their business partners as well. And tying in not only an asset risk strategy into your, what end user devices are deployed in your organization, or what infrastructure components you have, whether they're physically in a data center you control, own, or rent, or whether they're cloud assets. Those all tie into also who's provided those physical devices, who's provided the software you're running on those, who's providing the services you're leveraging to access that infrastructure, that software, and ultimately being able to manage your enterprise risk and fulfillment across not only identification of those risks, those policies, those controls, not only being able to respond to particular incidents or vulnerabilities as they come up, but being able to understand your exposure based on third-party involvement and who your partners and who you're doing business with. So we really want to help folks position themselves in a way that kind of helps build an underlying goal or system of people, process, technology that enables you to not only, yes, understand and prioritize stakeholder risk risk appetite expectations, but also setting objectives that are congruent with those values and risks, making sure that we can achieve objectives while optimizing your risk profile and protecting the value that either you're delivering internally or that your vendors are providing you, and then being able to make strategic, tactical decisions around how you operate within those legal, contractual, internal, social, and ethical boundaries. Being able to provide relevant, reliable, and timely information to those stakeholders, and ultimately measuring your performance and the effectiveness of those risk mitigation strategies you put in place. Specifically, when we start talking about security incident or vulnerability response, we get into the kind of more operational aspects, the more immediate, the more reactive components to this part of the landscape. And we know that ServiceNow as a platform is not a one-size-fits-all. It doesn't do everything. We don't need it to. There are wonderful tools out there that we can integrate with. Not only things like Qualys or Tenable, but also things like Tanium, Splunk, Anomaly, and many, many others. We want to make sure that we're leveraging the tools, again, aligned to that strategic platform roadmap that you have for your organization, so that we're getting the right data in the right place so that we can action it as we need. And before I kind of move into the next topic here, I want to make sure I kind of tie this together, and something that I think everyone here will be able to understand and start thinking about how they can implement. And that's 3 major lines of defense for how to approach these topics and these issues. And that's the first line of defense really being your individual business units and your security operations teams, making sure that you have accountability from a content standpoint. Who manages which risks and who's accountable to implement actions to both manage and treat those risks, both as a long-term objective for the organization and as those things become apparent immediately as we're responding to them. The second line of defense is really around our risk and compliance teams, building around not only content accountability in that first line, but process accountability, so that we're able to assess whether the risks in those business units or other teams have been appropriately identified and managed. Those risk assessments, are they accurate? Were they filled out by the right people? And that third line of defense is really around auditing, making sure that we've got that continuous improvement mindset like we always have for everything when we talk about this platform. Focus on our process and content monitoring internally when we audit, providing assurance on these processes and controls by assessing the effectiveness of those processes and controls. Not just do we think it's good or bad, but how effective were we in those first and second lines of defense. So this is a topic I could probably wax poetic about for days if you let me, and definitely interested to talk more with everyone about everything we've kind of hit on today. And I think a good way to help us put a container around everything that we've covered in this session is to cover some of the major takeaways. And I'm going to turn it back over to other Josh to hit some of those key takeaways.
Thank you, Josh. So yeah, 5 major takeaways from the webinar today. The first one is the importance of developing and maturing your platform strategy. It seems simple, but you won't be as successful without goals, objectives, and priorities. And you would be surprised how many companies try and be successful without one. Takeaway number 2, from an organizational point of view, there's a clear necessity for individual accountability within ServiceNow teams. So empower your team members, be specific about who's doing what, and be successful. Takeaway number 3, prioritize cross-organization alignment. You need it for platform maturity and expansion. You also need it for minimizing technical debt. It's really the only way to get away from focusing on just the back room and get towards focusing on providing improved services to your employees and customers. And on that note, takeaway number 4, build resiliency and really differentiate by prioritizing, by unifying, by simplifying employee and customer experience, and by taking advantage of the new cool stuff that ServiceNow is releasing on the platform in this area. And finally, improving your risk posture. It's really only possible when you're looking at it from the view of the bridge, not from a ground level. You need to be actively managing against risk, against vulnerabilities, and against exposure. So hopefully those takeaways hit home with all of you. I think I'm passing this back to Sonder to kind of take us home here.
All right, thank you, Josh. So we have a few questions here, but if you still have any, feel free to type it in. We'll try and answer in the time we have left. But one of these questions is, how do I know at what maturity level my internal processes are?
Yeah, this is Joshua. I can probably take a first stab at that one, and it's a great question, and one that we often confront with customers who either admittedly don't know how to evaluate their current maturity, or maybe they're a little overconfident in their self-evaluation of where they think they are, and the goal is really to set a realistic measurement against which we can kind of baseline not only the expectations for where they think they are, but ultimately where they are in their journey for, again, that kind of concept of wanting to be at a certain maturity level versus needing to be at another. And we at Acorio have a number of maturity models that we evaluate against for different processes across the platform, as well as different ways that organizational units interact with one another. And we would love to engage with folks in an advisory engagement to run through those and help you understand exactly where you are in your current maturity model for different processes that you currently have implemented or that you want to implement, and help guide you in an effective way to enable the critical path dependencies to get you there.
Great. Thank you so much, Joshua. We have another question from the audience. How to put a financial value on filling visibility gaps, such as in the asset disposal process, that will reduce risk?
Yeah, I can probably take that one again. This is Joshua again.
Go ahead, Josh. I was gonna go ahead.
This is a really good question, and we only have a few minutes left. This is a topic that we could probably talk about for hours and days, but the short version here is based on your either amortization schedule or whether you're leasing versus purchasing assets, whether they're physical versus virtual, and what that disposal process needs to look like, what your, from an HR service delivery standpoint, what your transition or offboarding processes look like to not only effectively identify when assets need to be turned off, whether they're, again, hardware versus software, whether it's access to particular systems, those all carry financial impact with them beyond the physical device or the license that you have for a particular piece of software, particularly when we're talking about risk mitigation strategies. So there's a number of different ways to measure that. And I would really look forward to hopefully engaging with whoever asked that question to learn a little bit more around what process elements they currently have in place and how we could help them effectively measure some of that cost of either ownership or that opportunity cost, or cost avoidance opportunities or risk mitigation cost opportunities based on what their current environment looks like. Really good question.
All right. Thank you again, Joshua. We, I think, have time for just one more question. We have one more from the audience. What is a good example of an impact to business report / criteria for measuring success?
I can take that one, Sonder. I think the simplest way with the short time that we have is what we typically do in our advisory engagements is work with our clients to see what their overall objectives are. From there, we develop the solution for business outcomes, and the reports that you're looking for really come from developing metrics that address those business incomes. So maybe it's you want to become more efficient, as an example, in your IT response time. Obviously, you would want to develop a metric such as mean time to repair. Again, like Joshua just answered for the last question, this is something that you could spend a lot of time really talking about, but we really tell our clients, establish objectives, develop your solution. In response to that solution, what business objectives are you achieving with that solution, and then really develop metrics to match those business objectives. Sandra?
Oop, I was on mute for a moment. Thank you to everyone who attended this webinar. If you have any more questions and want to see what Acorio is about, you can visit acorio.com, or you can also email marketing@acorio.com, and we can direct you to the right people if you have any questions. And also, I just want to thank our presenters today. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and being with us on this afternoon.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you, everybody.
Have a good day.